My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I'm 38 years old. 24 hours ago, I buried my husband of 15 years after a sudden heart attack. Today, I discovered that my entire marriage was built on lies. My sister has been sleeping with my husband for over a decade, and my 12-year-old nephew is actually my husband's biological son. The will she waved in my face while I was still wearing my funeral dress left everything to his real family, and I wasn't included in that definition. Before I tell you how my world imploded at my own husband's funeral, I need you to guess something. What would you do if you discovered your sister had been having an affair with your husband for 12 years and they'd been planning to cut you out of everything? Drop your wildest predictions in the comments because this story has more betrayals than a telenovela. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because you won't believe how this family deception unraveled and how karma came for everyone involved. Looking back, I can see the signs I chose to ignore, but at the time, David and I seemed to have the perfect marriage that everyone envied. We met in college, he was studying business, I was getting my nursing degree. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely devoted to building a life together. We married right after graduation, bought a modest house in suburban Phoenix, and started planning our future. The first few years were everything I'd dreamed of. David's marketing career took off quickly, and my job at Phoenix General Hospital provided steady income and excellent benefits. We traveled, we laughed, we talked about having children. We tried for kids for 3 years before discovering that I had endometriosis that would make natural conception nearly impossible. The fertility treatments were expensive and emotionally draining, and after 2 failed IVF attempts, we decided to take a break and focus on each other. David was incredibly supportive during those dark fertility years. He held me when I cried after negative pregnancy tests, researched adoption options when I wasn't ready to talk about it, and never once made me feel like my inability to conceive was a burden on our marriage. Looking back, I wonder if his understanding came from guilt rather than genuine compassion. My sister Carmen was always a part of our lives, but never in a way that seemed inappropriate or suspicious. She was 3 years younger than me, had always been the free spirit of the family while I was the responsible older sister. Carmen had gotten pregnant at 19 with Tyler, refused to name the father, and had been raising him as a single mother while working various jobs and struggling financially. David and I helped Carmen whenever we could. We babysat Tyler regularly, helped with his school supplies and clothes, even paid for his summer camp a few times when Carmen was between jobs. David seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with Tyler, teaching him to throw a baseball, helping him with homework, taking him to Diamondbacks games when Carmen couldn't afford tickets. "You're such a natural with kids," I used to tell David after watching him and Tyler together. "You're going to be an amazing father someday." "I hope so," he'd always reply with a smile that I now realize was hiding so much more than I could have imagined. Carmen lived about 20 minutes away in a small apartment complex that David and I visited frequently. Family dinners, birthday parties, holidays, we were all genuinely close, or so I thought. Carmen never seemed to have serious relationships, which I attributed to being a young single mother focused on raising Tyler. She'd date occasionally, but nothing ever seemed to stick. "I guess I just haven't found the right person yet," she'd say when our mother would ask about her love life. Tyler and I are doing fine on our own. David's career continued to flourish, and by our 10th wedding anniversary, he'd been promoted to regional marketing director for a major retail chain. The salary increase allowed us to upgrade to a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale, more space than we needed as a childless couple, but David insisted we'd grow into it. "Maybe we'll adopt soon," he'd say, showing me the bedrooms we could convert into nurseries. "Or maybe we'll try IVF again. We have the space and the resources now." I was hesitant about more fertility treatments, but David seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of expanding our family. What I didn't know was that he already had a son he was raising in secret, visiting regularly under the guise of helping his struggling sister-in-law. The warning signs were there if I'd been looking for them. David's increased business trips that coincidentally seemed to happen when Carmen needed help with Tyler. His phone habits changed around our 8th year of marriage. Suddenly he was protective of it, taking it to the bathroom with him, keeping it face down during dinner. When I commented on it once, he laughed it off. "Work has been crazy lately," he said. "You know how demanding this promotion has been. I'm probably just stressed." Carmen's financial situation seemed to improve gradually over the years, which she attributed to getting better jobs and being more responsible with money. She moved to a nicer apartment, Tyler started playing expensive sports leagues, and she even bought a decent used car. When I complimented her on getting her life together, she'd just smile and say she was learning to be smarter with her priorities. Tyler was thriving too. He was an excellent student, played baseball and soccer, and had this confident, charming personality that reminded me of someone, though I could never quite place who. He called David Uncle David, but their relationship seemed closer than typical uncle-nephew dynamics. Tyler would light up when David walked into a room, and David would spend hours patiently teaching him things that seemed more parental than avuncular. "Tyler really looks up to you," I told David one evening after watching them work on a science project together. "He's a good kid," David replied. "Carmen's doing a great job raising him, but he needs positive male role models." Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is? But I thought we were solid. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams. We still held hands watching movies, still talked about our days over dinner, still made love regularly. If someone had told me 5 years ago that David was living a double life, I would have laughed in their face. The only real tension in our marriage came from the continued pressure about children. My mother constantly asked when we were going to give her grandchildren, friends would make comments about our quiet house, and I felt the familiar pang of inadequacy every time someone announced a pregnancy. David always defended me in these situations, always redirected the conversation, always reminded me that our life together was complete as it was. "We don't need children to be happy," he'd say after particularly difficult family gatherings. "We have each other, and that's enough." But sometimes I'd catch him staring off into space with this wistful expression, and I wondered if he was thinking about the children we'd never have. I wondered if he resented me for my fertility issues, if he felt cheated out of fatherhood by marrying me. I never wondered if he already was a father. 3 months ago, David started having chest pains and shortness of breath during his morning runs. Being a nurse, I insisted he see a cardiologist immediately. Dr. Patel found some irregularities in his EKG and ordered stress tests and an echocardiogram. The results showed early signs of coronary artery disease, not immediately life-threatening, but something that needed monitoring and lifestyle changes. David was only 41, but his father had died of a heart attack at 55, so we took the diagnosis seriously. He started eating better, cut back on stress at work, and began taking medication to manage his cholesterol and blood pressure. We talked about early retirement, about traveling more, about making the most of our time together. "I want to make sure I'm around for a long time," he told me after his first cardiology appointment. "We have so much life left to live together." 2 weeks ago, David had what seemed like a mild heart episode during his morning shower. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. Sudden cardiac arrest, probably brought on by an undetected blockage that didn't show up in his recent tests. Dr. Patel said it was impossible to predict or prevent, sometimes these things just happen, even to people who are doing everything right. I was devastated but not completely shocked. Heart disease ran in David's family, and despite our precautions, genetics and bad luck had won. I spent the last 2 weeks planning his funeral, accepting condolences, and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life as a widow at 38. I had no idea that my real nightmare was just beginning. The funeral was everything David would have wanted, tasteful, well-attended, and focused on celebrating his life rather than mourning his death. Phoenix First Presbyterian was packed with colleagues, friends, extended family, and neighbors whose lives David had touched over the years. I sat in the front row wearing the black dress David had always complimented, flanked by my parents and Carmen, who had been surprisingly supportive throughout the planning process. Carmen had been at my side constantly since David's death, helping with arrangements, fielding phone calls, and managing the endless stream of casseroles and flower deliveries. I was grateful for her support during such a difficult time, though I noticed she seemed almost as devastated by David's death as I was. David was such a good man, she kept saying throughout the week. Such a good husband to you, such a good person. This is so unfair. Tyler seemed equally shaken by David's death. The 12-year-old had been unusually quiet and withdrawn since hearing the news, which I attributed to this being his first real experience with death. David had been a constant presence in Tyler's life, and losing his uncle was probably confusing and scary for a kid his age. During the service, I noticed several people I didn't recognize, middle-aged men in expensive suits who didn't seem to fit with David's work colleagues or our social circle. When I asked Carmen about them during the reception, she said they were probably business associates she didn't know. But something about the way she avoided eye contact when she said it made me file the observation away for later. The reception was held at our house, which David and I had always loved hosting parties in. Our spacious kitchen and backyard were perfect for entertaining, and David had taken pride in grilling for our guests while I managed the side dishes and drinks. Standing in that same space, accepting condolences and watching people share memories of my husband, felt surreal and heartbreaking. What struck me most was how many people mentioned David's relationship with Tyler. Several of David's work colleagues commented on how much he talked about his nephew, how proud he was of Tyler's baseball achievements, how he never missed Tyler's games when he was in town. David always lit up when he talked about that boy, said Janet from David's office. You could tell how much Tyler meant to him. It's beautiful how close your family is. He was always showing us pictures of Tyler's games, added Mike from accounting. Last month he took a half day to attend Tyler's championship game. Said he wouldn't miss it for the world. These comments puzzled me because I didn't remember David mentioning taking time off for Tyler's games. In fact, I didn't even know Tyler had been in a championship game last month. When I mentioned this to Carmen, she brushed it off. You know how David was, she said quickly. He didn't like to make a big deal about helping out. He probably didn't want you to feel obligated to come to every game too. But David wasn't typically secretive about his activities. He usually told me about his plans, especially when they involved family. The fact that he'd been attending Tyler's games without mentioning it was odd. After most of the guests had left and we were cleaning up, I overheard Tyler talking to his friend Brady, whose mother had brought him to pay respects. I can't believe my dad is gone, Tyler said quietly, and I froze with a stack of plates in my hands. Wait, I thought your dad wasn't around, Brady replied, confused. Uncle David was like a dad to me, Tyler corrected quickly, glancing around to see if anyone had heard. It just feels like losing a dad. The correction felt forced, like Tyler had caught himself saying something he wasn't supposed to say. But grief makes people say strange things, so I tried not to read too much into a 12-year-old's slip of tongue. After everyone left, Carmen lingered to help with the final cleanup. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, boxing up leftover food and washing dishes. But I kept thinking about the strange comments, the unfamiliar men at the service, David's secret attendance at Tyler's games. Carmen, I said carefully as we finished loading the dishwasher, was David spending more time with you and Tyler than I realized? She paused, dish towel in hand, and something flickered across her face before she composed herself. What do you mean? People kept mentioning how much he talked about Tyler at work, how he never missed games. I didn't realize he was so involved in Tyler's activities. David cared about Tyler, Carmen said simply. You know how he is with kids. Her voice cracked slightly on the correction. But he was taking time off work for games and not telling me about it. Carmen set down the dish towel and turned to face me fully. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me something important. Her expression was pained, almost guilty, and she opened her mouth like she was about to speak. Then Tyler appeared in the doorway. Mom, are we going home soon? I have homework. The moment passed. Carmen's expression shifted back to normal, and whatever she'd been about to say was lost. Of course, me Joe. Let me just grab my purse." As they prepared to leave, Tyler hugged me goodbye, and again I was struck by how devastated he seemed. This wasn't just sadness about losing an uncle figure, this was the grief of a child who'd lost someone truly important to him. "I miss him already," Tyler whispered against my shoulder, and I felt him start to cry. "I know, sweetheart. We all miss him. He was the best dad," Tyler started, then caught himself. "The best uncle. He was the best uncle." There it was again. That slip, that correction, that moment of saying something that felt true before remembering it was supposed to be something else. After they left, I sat in my empty house surrounded by the detritus of David's funeral and tried to make sense of the strange undercurrents I'd been noticing. David taking time off for Tyler's games without mentioning it. Tyler calling David dad before correcting himself. Carmen's guilty expression when I asked about David's involvement in their lives. I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me see patterns that weren't there. David had always been close to Tyler, that wasn't suspicious. He was a generous, caring man who took his role as Tyler's uncle seriously. The fact that he'd been more involved than I realized probably just meant he was trying to step up as a father figure for a boy who didn't have one. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed alone for the first time since David's death, one thought kept nagging at me: if David was just being a good uncle, why had he been so secretive about it? The answer to that question would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and my entire life. I just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up to the devastating reality that David was gone and I had to figure out how to live without him. The house felt impossibly quiet and empty, filled with reminders of our 15 years together but lacking the presence that had made it home. I'd taken a leave of absence from the hospital to deal with funeral arrangements and grief, which meant I had nothing but time to sit with my thoughts and memories. I decided to start going through David's belongings, not because I was ready to pack them away, but because I needed to feel connected to him somehow. I started with his home office, the room where he'd spent countless evenings working on presentations and conference calls. His desk was meticulously organized, just like everything else in David's life, labeled folders, sorted papers, everything in its proper place. Going through his filing cabinet, I found the usual documents. Tax returns, insurance papers, investment statements, warranties for appliances we'd bought together. But in the bottom drawer, tucked behind a folder of old utility bills, I found something that didn't fit the pattern: a manila envelope marked personal in David's handwriting. Inside were photographs I'd never seen before. Pictures of Tyler at various ages, playing baseball, opening Christmas presents, blowing out birthday candles. But these weren't the casual family photos I was used to seeing. These were the kinds of pictures a parent takes: candid shots, milestone moments, professional school portraits. There had to be 50 photos spanning Tyler's entire childhood, carefully preserved and organized chronologically. At the bottom of the envelope was a small piece of paper with David's handwriting: Tyler's first home run, age 8. Tyler's first day of 4th grade. Tyler's science fair project, age 10. These weren't the casual observations of an uncle, these were the careful documentation of a father tracking his child's growth. My hands were shaking as I went through the photos, seeing Tyler's face at different ages and recognizing something I'd never noticed before: the resemblance to David. The same eyes, the same smile, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. How had I missed it? How had I looked at this child hundreds of times over the years and never seen my husband staring back at me? With growing dread, I continued searching David's office. In his computer, I found folders I'd never seen before: T baseball schedule, T school events, T medical records. The medical records folder made my blood run cold. David had copies of Tyler's pediatric appointments, vaccination records, and insurance information. Why would an uncle need access to a child's private medical information? But it was the baseball schedule that broke my heart. David had detailed calendars going back 3 years, marking every single one of Tyler's games, practices, and tournaments. Color-coded entries showing when he planned to attend, notes about which games conflicted with work, contact information for coaches and team parents. This wasn't casual uncle involvement, this was a father managing his son's sports schedule. I remembered all those Saturday mornings when David said he was going for long runs or meeting old college friends for lunch. All those weeknight work dinners that ran late. All those business trips that he never seemed to want to talk about in detail. How many of those times had he actually been with Tyler? The final piece of evidence was hidden in David's wallet, which the hospital had returned with his other personal effects. Behind his driver's license was a small school photo of Tyler from this past year, the kind of wallet-sized picture that parents carry of their children. Written on the back in David's handwriting was Tyler Rodriguez Martinez, age 12, 7th grade. Rodriguez Martinez. Not just Tyler Rodriguez, which was Carmen's last name, but Tyler Rodriguez Martinez, as if David considered himself the boy's father. I sat on David's office floor, surrounded by evidence of a secret life I'd never suspected, and felt my world collapse for the second time in 2 weeks. My husband hadn't just been helping his nephew, he'd been raising his son. Tyler wasn't Carmen's child from some unnamed teenage relationship. Tyler was David's son. Which meant Carmen and David had been having an affair for at least 13 years, probably longer. They'd been sleeping together while I was struggling with infertility, while I was crying over negative pregnancy tests, while David was holding me and promising that we'd figure out how to have a family together. All that time, he already had a family. He'd just chosen to keep it secret from his wife. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't process it all at once. This wasn't just infidelity, this was an entire double life. David had been playing the role of devoted husband while secretly being a father to another woman's child. Carmen had been playing the role of struggling single mother while actually being supported by her sister's husband. And Tyler had been playing the role of nephew while actually being my husband's son. I don't know how long I sat there among the scattered photos and documents, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Eventually, my phone rang, and Carmen's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it, this woman who'd been my sister, my friend, my confidant for 35 years, and wondered how I'd never seen the truth. Elena? How are you holding up today? I'm fine, I managed, though my voice sounded strange even to me. I was thinking about coming over with some dinner. You shouldn't be alone right now. The casual concern in her voice made me feel sick. How could she sound so normal, so caring, when she'd been sleeping with my husband for over a decade? How could she comfort me through David's death when she was probably grieving the loss of her secret partner? Actually, Carmen, I need to ask you something. Of course. What is it? Is Tyler David's son? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought the call had disconnected. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Elena, Just answer the question. Is Tyler David's biological child? Another long pause. Then, quietly, yes. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already known the answer. Hearing it out loud made it real in a way that finding the photos hadn't. How long? I asked. Elena, this isn't how I wanted you to find out. I never wanted you to find out. How long have you been sleeping with my husband? It's complicated, how long? 13 years, she whispered. It started 13 years ago. 13 years. Tyler was 12 years old. Carmen had gotten pregnant with David's child just 2 years into my marriage, right around the time we'd started trying to have children of our own. While I was tracking ovulation cycles and taking fertility drugs, David was creating a baby with my sister. I'll be right over, Carmen said quickly. We need to talk about this in person. There are things you need to understand. Don't, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Don't come over. I can't see you right now. Elena, please. Let me explain. I hung up on her and turned off my phone. I wasn't ready for explanations or justifications or whatever story Carmen had prepared to make this betrayal seem reasonable. I needed time to process the fact that my entire marriage had been a lie, that my sister had been my husband's mistress for over a decade, and that the nephew I'd helped raise was actually my husband's secret child. But as I sat in David's office, surrounded by evidence of his secret fatherhood, I realized this was just the beginning. If David and Carmen had been maintaining this deception for 13 years, what else had they been planning? What other secrets were waiting to be discovered? The answer would come sooner than I expected, and it would be even worse than anything I'd imagined. I need to pause this story here because what I'm about to tell you next is so shocking that I still have trouble believing it happened. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely had been lying to you about everything that mattered? The betrayal I'd already uncovered was devastating enough, but what came next made it look like a minor deception. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take a turn that will make you question everything about family loyalty and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of shock and disbelief, avoiding Carmen's calls and trying to process the magnitude of David's betrayal. I'd lost my husband, discovered he'd been living a double life, and learned that my sister had been his mistress for over a decade. I thought I'd hit rock bottom in terms of devastating revelations. I was wrong. Thursday morning, I received a call from David's attorney, James Morrison, requesting a meeting to discuss David's will. This struck me as routine. As David's wife, I assumed I was the primary beneficiary of his estate. We'd discussed our wills years ago during a financial planning session, and while we'd never formally updated them, I believed everything would come to me as his surviving spouse. Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Morrison said when I arrived at his office, I need to inform you that there have been some recent changes to your husband's will that you may not be aware of. Changes? What kind of changes? David updated his will 6 months ago. He added several new beneficiaries and made significant modifications to the distribution of his assets. 6 months ago. Right around the time David's heart condition was diagnosed, when we'd been talking about making the most of our time together and planning for the future. Apparently, David had been planning for a very different future than the one he'd discussed with me. What kind of modifications? Mr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps we should wait for the other beneficiaries to arrive before we begin the formal reading. Other beneficiaries? Before he could answer, there was a knock on the conference room door. Carmen walked in, followed by Tyler, and both of them looked as uncomfortable as I felt confused. Carmen? What are you doing here? Elena, I tried to call you back after we talked. There are things about David's will that you need to know, Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Morrison interrupted. Perhaps we should proceed with the reading so everyone understands the full scope of your husband's final wishes. The next 30 minutes were the most surreal and devastating of my life. As Mr. Morrison read through David's will, my entire understanding of my marriage, my financial security, and my future disintegrated. David had left the house, our house, the home we'd bought together and renovated with our joint income, to Tyler Rodriguez Martinez, my beloved son. Tyler, who was 12 years old, would inherit our 4-bedroom Scottsdale home when he turned 18, with Carmen serving as trustee until then. David's life insurance policy, which I'd assumed would come to me as his wife, had been changed to list Tyler as the primary beneficiary. $500,000 that I'd been counting on to help me rebuild my life was going to the child David had fathered with my sister. His 401k, his investment accounts, his savings, everything had been restructured to provide for Tyler Rodriguez Martinez and his mother, Carmen Rodriguez, in recognition of their importance to my life and my desire to ensure their financial security. I was mentioned in the will, but only as the recipient of David's car and his personal belongings. Everything else, the assets we'd built together over 15 years of marriage, the financial security I'd thought would help me navigate widowhood, was going to his secret family. But the most devastating part wasn't the money. It was the letter David had written to accompany the will, which Mr. Morrison read aloud in his professional, emotionless voice. To my beloved wife Elena, I know this will come as a shock, and I'm sorry you're learning about Tyler and Carmen this way. I never meant for our situation to become so complicated, but I couldn't continue living a lie. Tyler is my son, and I love him more than I ever thought possible. Carmen and I have been together for 13 years, and while I never intended to hurt you, I can't deny that they've become my real family. I hope you can understand that a man's responsibility to his child must come before all other considerations. I provided for you as best I can while ensuring that Tyler and Carmen have the security they deserve. Please don't blame them for my choices. I initiated our relationship, and I made the decisions that led us here. I hope someday you can forgive me and understand that this was about love, not malice. The conference room fell silent after Mr. Morrison finished reading. I stared at Carmen, who couldn't meet my eyes, and at Tyler, who looked confused and uncomfortable. My husband had written a love letter to his mistress and illegitimate child disguised as a legal document, and he'd made sure it would be read to me after his death when I couldn't confront him about it. Elena, Carmen said quietly, I wanted to tell you before the will reading. That's why I kept calling. You knew about this? You knew he was leaving me nothing? He wanted to make sure Tyler was taken care of. You have your career, your nursing income, your own assets, my own assets? I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. Carmen, I've been married to David for 15 years. Everything we owned was built together. That house you're inheriting? I picked out the tiles in the kitchen. I painted the master bedroom. I planned the landscaping. And now it belongs to your son? Our son, Carmen said quietly. Your son. I was never his mother. I was just the wife who was being lied to while you two played house behind my back. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Martinez, I understand this is difficult, but there are a few more items to address. More? I couldn't imagine what else David could have taken from me. Your husband established a trust fund for Tyler's education, funded by assets from your joint savings account. Additionally, he made arrangements for Carmen to receive David's business partnership shares, which will provide ongoing income. David's business partnership was worth at least $200,000, money I'd assumed would help me maintain our mortgage and living expenses. Instead, it was providing ongoing income for his mistress. How is this legal? I asked. We were married. Don't I have rights to marital assets? In Arizona, spouses can dispose of their separate property as they see fit. Your husband was careful to document that most of these assets were acquired through his individual efforts rather than marital contributions. Without challenging the will in court, which would be expensive and uncertain, these distributions will stand as written. I looked at Carmen, who was finally meeting my eyes, and saw something I hadn't expected: guilt, yes, but also defiance. She wasn't apologetic about taking everything David had left behind. She was protective of it. Carmen, I said carefully, how long have you known about the will? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the truth. You helped him write it, didn't you? You knew he was cutting me out, and you helped him do it. Elena, David wanted to make sure Tyler had opportunities. You planned this. Both of you. You waited until he died to reveal that Tyler was his son, and you made sure I'd find out in the most humiliating way possible. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen, Carmen? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and David orchestrated the perfect betrayal. 13 years of lies, followed by financial devastation delivered at a will reading where I'm supposed to gracefully accept that my husband's real family deserves everything we built together. Tyler, who had been quiet throughout this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Mom, you said Dad wanted Aunt Elena to understand. You said he loved her too. The words hit me like a slap. Tyler calling David Dad in front of me, Carmen being called Mom in the context of David's fatherhood, the casual reference to David loving multiple women simultaneously, it was like they'd been practicing being a family while I was being a wife. I stood up and gathered my purse. I need to leave. Elena, please, Carmen said, standing as well. We're still family. This doesn't have to change everything between us. I turned to look at her, this woman who'd been my sister for 35 years, my confidant, my support system, and now my husband's mistress and the mother of his secret child. "Carmen, you've been sleeping with my husband for 13 years and you just inherited my house. We stopped being family the moment you decided David was worth more to you than I was." As I walked out of that conference room, I realized that my devastation was complete. I'd lost my husband, my sister, my home, my financial security, and my sense of reality all in the span of 1 week. But I hadn't lost my fighting spirit, and I was about to discover that neither David nor Carmen had been as careful as they thought they'd been. Driving home from the attorney's office, I felt like I was moving through a nightmare that kept getting worse. Everything I'd believed about my life had been systematically dismantled, and I was left with nothing but questions and rage. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something else: determination. David and Carmen had orchestrated an elaborate deception that had lasted over a decade, but they weren't as clever as they thought they were. I called in sick to work indefinitely and dedicated myself to understanding exactly how extensively I'd been betrayed. If I was going to lose everything, I wanted to know the full scope of what had been taken from me and how long they'd been planning this financial devastation. My first stop was our joint bank accounts. As David's widow, I still had access to our shared finances, and what I found there made my stomach turn. For the past 2 years, David had been systematically moving money out of our joint savings and into accounts I'd never seen before. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, but increasing in frequency and size over the past year. The transfers were cleverly disguised as business expenses, charitable donations, or home improvement costs. But when I cross-referenced the dates with our actual expenses, none of them matched up. David had been essentially embezzling from our marriage, slowly draining our joint assets and moving them into accounts that would benefit Carmen and Tyler after his death. The home improvement expenses were particularly insulting. David had been transferring money labeled as kitchen renovation and roof repairs while our actual kitchen was falling apart and our roof had been leaking for 6 months. He'd been using our marital money to fund his secret family while letting our actual home deteriorate. I drove to Carmen's apartment complex, not to confront her, but to observe. If David had been supporting her and Tyler for years, it should be visible in how they were living. What I saw confirmed my suspicions and added new layers to my rage. Carmen's modest apartment was actually a 3-bedroom unit in one of the nicer complexes in Tempe, with a pool, fitness center, and gated parking. The rent on a place like that had to be at least $2,500 a month, far more than Carmen could afford on her sporadic employment income. In the parking lot sat a 2021 Honda CR-V that I'd never seen before, registered to Carmen Rodriguez according to the license plate lookup I ran. Tyler's bike in the covered parking area was a top-of-the-line Trek that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Through the ground floor window, I could see expensive furniture, a large flat-screen TV, and gaming equipment that suggested this family was living far above Carmen's supposed means. David hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been funding an entirely separate household while I was clipping coupons and arguing with him about our grocery budget. Back at home, I started going through our financial records with the methodical attention I'd learned as a nurse reviewing patient charts. David had been incredibly careful to hide the extent of his financial support for Carmen and Tyler, but he hadn't been perfect. Credit card statements showed purchases at stores I'd never been to, in amounts that didn't match anything David had brought home. Restaurant charges for expensive dinners when David claimed to be working late. Hotel charges in Phoenix when he was supposedly on out-of-town business trips. The most damning evidence came from David's phone records, which I was able to access through our family plan. For the past 5 years, David had been calling and texting Carmen multiple times every single day. Not just quick check-ins, but long conversations, sometimes lasting an hour or more. There were calls at 6 a.m. before I woke up, calls during his lunch breaks, calls late at night after I'd gone to bed. Looking at the pattern, I realized David had been living 2 complete lives. He'd wake up early to call Carmen before starting his day with me. He'd text her throughout the workday, call her during his commute home, and then slip away to call her again after I was asleep. Their relationship wasn't an affair, it was a parallel marriage. But the most infuriating discovery came when I found David's laptop, which he'd apparently forgotten to password protect in his final weeks. His email account contained years of correspondence with Carmen that read like love letters between a devoted couple discussing their shared child. Tyler's teacher says he's reading at a high school level now. You should be so proud, he gets his intelligence from you, Carmen had written just 6 months ago. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. I hate pretending Tyler isn't my son when we're around other people, David had replied. Soon, Carmen had responded. Once everything is settled, we can finally be a real family. Everything is settled. What did that mean? I scrolled through months of emails, looking for context, and found a thread that made my blood run cold. 3 months before David's death, he and Carmen had been discussing the plan in detail. David's cardiologist had warned him that his heart condition was more serious than they'd initially thought. His prognosis was uncertain, and he needed to make arrangements in case something happened to him. I've updated everything we discussed, David had written. Morrison has the new will, and the transfers are almost complete. If something happens to me, you and Tyler will be taken care of. What about Elena? Carmen had asked. Elena is strong, and she has her career. She'll be fine. Tyler needs security more than she does. Are you sure she won't fight it? She'll be hurt, obviously, but Elena isn't vindictive. Once she understands that this is about Tyler's future, she'll accept it. They'd been planning this for months. David's heart condition hadn't been a surprise that led to hasty estate planning, it had been the catalyst for a carefully orchestrated plan to cut me out of everything we'd built together. And Carmen hadn't been a passive recipient of David's generosity. She'd been an active participant in planning my financial destruction. But the most devastating email was one David had sent to Carmen just 2 weeks before his death. I know this has been hard on you, pretending to support Elena through all of this. I appreciate you being there for her while we finalize everything. After I'm gone, you won't have to play the caring sister anymore. You can focus on being Tyler's mother and living the life we should have had from the beginning. Carmen's response, I just want this to be over. I'm tired of lying to her face and pretending to care about her problems when all I can think about is our future. Pretending to care about my problems. I thought about all the times over the years when Carmen had comforted me through miscarriages, held me while I cried about my infertility, listened to me worry about David working too much or being stressed about money. All of it had been an act. She'd been sleeping with my husband, carrying his child, and planning to take everything I had while playing the role of supportive sister. The phone rang, interrupting my descent into rage-fueled investigation. Carmen's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since discovering Tyler's paternity, I answered. Elena, thank God. I've been so worried about you. Are you okay? The concern in her voice made me physically ill. Even now, even after the will reading, she was still performing the role of caring sister. I'm fine, Carmen. Just processing everything. I know this is a lot to take in. Maybe we could have lunch tomorrow and talk about everything? I think if you understood how it all happened, it might be easier to accept. Accept? You think I should accept that my husband was living a double life and you helped him steal everything from me? Elena, it wasn't like that. David loved you, he really did. But Tyler is his son, and a father has responsibilities. Carmen, I interrupted, I found the emails. The silence on the other end stretched so long that I wondered if she'd hung up. What emails? She finally asked, but her voice had changed. The fake concern was gone, replaced by something sharper. All of them. The planning emails, the discussions about the plan, the transfer strategies. I know you two orchestrated this whole thing, and I know you were counting down the days until you didn't have to pretend to care about my problems anymore. Another long silence. Then Carmen's voice, cold and completely different from the sister I'd known my entire life. David's gone, Elena. What's done is done. You can be angry all you want, but Tyler is his son and he deserves his father's legacy. And what do I deserve, Carmen? After 15 years of marriage, after supporting you through Tyler's entire childhood, after believing you were my sister and David was my husband, what do I deserve? You deserve to move on and build a new life. You're only 38. You can remarry, have your own children if you want them badly enough. Tyler only gets one father. The casual cruelty of her response took my breath away. Move on and have my own children, as if my fertility struggles were just a matter of not trying hard enough. Remarry, as if I was a damaged good that could be easily replaced. Build a new life, as if losing everything I'd worked for was just a minor inconvenience. Carmen, I said very calmly, you made a mistake. What mistake? You assumed I'd be too devastated to fight back. You assumed I'd quietly accept being robbed and betrayed. You assumed wrong. Elena, there's nothing to fight. The will is legal, the transfers were legitimate, and David made his choices. You can hire lawyers if you want to waste your money, but you'll lose. We'll see about that. I hung up on her and immediately called Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who'd helped me with the spinal injury case years ago. If Carmen and David thought they'd covered all their bases, they were about to learn that stealing from a grieving widow was more complicated than they'd anticipated. Carmen was right about one thing, David was gone, and what was done was done. But she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't going to quietly accept their betrayal, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The war for my life was just beginning. Jennifer Walsh listened to my story with the focused attention of someone who specialized in complex family betrayals, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly letting me pour out the full scope of David and Carmen's deception. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Elena, this is one of the most elaborate cases of marital asset manipulation I've ever seen. Your husband and sister didn't just have an affair, they executed a multi-year conspiracy to defraud you of your marital property. Can we fight it? We can do more than fight it. We can destroy it. Arizona is a community property state, which means everything acquired during your marriage belongs equally to both spouses, regardless of whose name is on the account. David couldn't legally give away community property without your consent, which means most of these transfers and bequests are invalid. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer and her team began dismantling David and Carmen's careful plan piece by piece. What they thought was clever financial maneuvering was actually a series of illegal transfers that violated community property laws. The house, which David had tried to leave to Tyler, was purchased with community property funds and improved with community property labor. David couldn't legally bequeath my half of the house to anyone else. The life insurance policy changes were valid, since those were considered separate property, but the investment accounts and savings that David had transferred to Carmen were all community property that had been illegally moved without my knowledge or consent. But Jennifer's real masterstroke was discovering something David and Carmen had overlooked in their planning. David's business partnership agreement contained a clause requiring spousal consent for any transfer of partnership interests. The shares David had tried to leave to Carmen were invalid because I'd never agreed to the transfer. Your husband made a critical error, Jennifer explained. He was so focused on hiding his assets from you that he forgot to check whether he actually had the legal right to dispose of them. Most of what he tried to give away wasn't his to give. The first victory came quickly. We filed an emergency motion to freeze all accounts connected to David's estate until the community property issues could be resolved. Within 48 hours, Carmen's access to the money David had left her was cut off, and the house transfer was put on hold. Carmen called me within hours of receiving the legal papers, and the mask of sisterly concern was completely gone. You're making a huge mistake, Elena. Tyler is an innocent child who deserves his father's support. Tyler is an innocent child whose mother conspired to steal from his aunt. If you'd been honest from the beginning, we could have worked something out. Instead, you chose to lie and cheat and steal. I never stole anything from you. Carmen, you lived in a luxury apartment for years while I was working double shifts to pay our mortgage. You drove a brand new car while I was driving David's 10-year-old Honda. You sent Tyler to expensive camps and bought him $1,000 bikes while I was clipping coupons. Every dollar David spent on you was stolen from our marriage. David gave us those things willingly. With money that belonged to both of us. You knew he was married, you knew he was taking money from our joint accounts, and you knew it was wrong. That makes you a co-conspirator in marital fraud. The legal discovery process revealed the full extent of David and Carmen's financial conspiracy. Over 13 years, David had transferred nearly $400,000 in community property to support Carmen and Tyler. Money that should have been building our retirement fund or paying down our mortgage had instead been funding his secret family's lifestyle. Jennifer also uncovered evidence that Carmen had been lying about her employment situation for years. She'd claimed to be working part-time retail jobs while actually being unemployed and supported entirely by David. Her tax returns showed minimal income, but her lifestyle showed thousands of dollars in monthly expenses. She'd been essentially David's kept woman while playing the role of struggling single mother to our family. The investigation also revealed that David's heart condition had been more serious than he'd let me know. His medical records showed that his cardiologist had warned him 6 months before his death that he was at high risk for sudden cardiac arrest. David had known he was likely to die soon, and he'd used that knowledge to accelerate his plan to transfer assets to Carmen before I could discover what was happening. But the most damaging evidence came from Tyler himself, though he didn't realize he was providing it. During a court-ordered interview to determine his best interests in the custody situation, Tyler innocently revealed details about his relationship with David that proved the extent of their secret family life. Tyler talked about weekend trips with Dad to baseball games and theme parks, trips I'd never known about. He mentioned family dinners at nice restaurants, shopping trips for school clothes, and regular overnight stays at David's office apartment, an apartment I'd never known existed. Dad always said that someday we'd all live together, Tyler told the court-appointed guardian. He said when I got older, we wouldn't have to keep our family a secret anymore. The apartment was perhaps the most shocking discovery. David had been renting a 2-bedroom apartment near his office for 3 years, ostensibly as a place to work late or stay when travel delays kept him from coming home. In reality, it was where he lived his secret life with Carmen and Tyler. The lease was in David's name alone, paid for with community property funds, and furnished like a family home. When we searched the apartment, we found photo albums documenting Tyler's entire childhood from David's perspective. Birthday parties I'd never been invited to, family vacations I'd never known about, milestone moments that David had celebrated with his secret family while lying to me about working late. There were also legal documents that David had been preparing, adoption papers to formally make Tyler his heir, divorce papers that were never filed, and a prenuptial agreement template that suggested David had been planning to leave me and marry Carmen before his death intervened. The prenuptial agreement was particularly telling because it showed David's true feelings about our marriage. He'd valued our community property at nearly $800,000 and had planned to offer me a $50,000 settlement in exchange for giving up all claims to everything we'd built together. He'd literally been planning to buy me out of my own life for 6 cents on the dollar. Carmen's deposition was a masterclass in watching someone's lies crumble under legal pressure. She'd clearly expected to coast through the proceedings on the strength of David's will and her performance as the grieving single mother. Instead, she faced hours of detailed questions about financial records, living expenses, and the timeline of her relationship with David. When confronted with evidence of the $400,000 in transfers, Carmen initially claimed she'd been unaware of where David's money came from. But Jennifer produced bank records showing that Carmen had been actively involved in the transfers, sometimes initiating requests for specific amounts of money for Tyler's expenses or her own needs. Ms. Rodriguez, Jennifer asked during one particularly brutal exchange, "Did you believe that Mr. Martinez was funding your lifestyle with money that belonged exclusively to him?" David told me he could afford to help us. But you knew he was married to your sister. Did you ever ask whether his wife was aware of these financial arrangements? I assumed Elena knew. You assumed your sister knew that her husband was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on another woman and child? I assumed she knew about Tyler being David's son. But you just testified that you kept Tyler's paternity secret for 12 years. How could Mrs. Martinez know about support payments for a child she didn't know existed? Carmen's contradictions piled up until even her own attorney looked uncomfortable. She'd been caught in a web of lies that she couldn't untangle, and her attempts to portray herself as an innocent victim of David's deception fell apart under scrutiny. The final blow came when Jennifer subpoenaed Carmen's email and text message records. The court ordered her to produce all communications with David over the past 5 years, and what emerged was a detailed record of their conspiracy to defraud me. Text messages showed Carmen actively encouraging David to move money out of our joint accounts. Emails revealed her suggestions for hiding purchases and transfers. Most damaging of all were messages where Carmen explicitly discussed waiting for David to die so they could implement the plan without interference from me. By the time we reached settlement negotiations, Carmen's position had collapsed completely. The evidence of financial fraud was overwhelming, her claims of innocence had been thoroughly debunked, and she was facing potential criminal charges for conspiracy to commit marital fraud. Jennifer presented Carmen's attorney with a choice. Accept our settlement offer, or face a criminal referral and a civil judgment that would bankrupt Carmen and leave Tyler with nothing. The settlement gave me back everything that had been stolen, plus damages for the emotional distress and legal costs of recovering my own property. Carmen would keep the legitimate gifts David had given her over the years, about $50,000 worth of jewelry and personal items, but everything else came back to me. Most importantly, Tyler would be provided for through a trust fund that I would control, ensuring he received support for his education and basic needs without enriching the mother who had conspired to steal from his aunt. Carmen signed the settlement agreement with tears of rage streaming down her face, but she signed it. The alternative was losing everything and potentially going to prison. As I walked out of that conference room with legal ownership of my life restored, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death: peace. Not happiness, I was still grieving the loss of my marriage and my sister. But peace in knowing that justice had been served and that actions had consequences, even for people who thought family loyalty would protect them from accountability. 2 years later, I'm sitting in the home that David tried to steal from me, writing this story and reflecting on how completely my understanding of family, loyalty, and justice has evolved. The house feels different now. It's truly mine in a way it never was when I shared it with someone who was secretly planning to give it away. I've redecorated, removing traces of David's presence and creating a space that reflects who I am now rather than who I was as his wife. The financial recovery was complete and satisfying. I got back every penny that David had transferred to Carmen, plus interest and legal fees. The business partnership shares alone were worth $300,000. Money that's allowed me to reduce my nursing hours and pursue the master's degree I'd always wanted. Ironically, David's betrayal ended up giving me more financial freedom than I'd ever had during our marriage. But the most important change has been in my relationship with Tyler. Despite everything Carmen did, Tyler really is an innocent victim in this situation. He didn't ask to be born into a web of lies, and he doesn't deserve to suffer because his parents chose deception over honesty. The trust fund I established for Tyler provides for his education and basic needs, but it also gives me the opportunity to be part of his life in a healthy way. Tyler knows I'm not his biological aunt anymore. Genetic testing confirmed David's paternity, but he also knows that I care about his well-being and want him to succeed. We have lunch once a month, just the two of us. I help him with homework, attend his baseball games, and try to be the stable adult presence that his mother's choices cost him. Tyler is a good kid who deserves better than being raised by someone who thinks lying and cheating are acceptable ways to get ahead in life. Carmen and I have no relationship anymore, and I'm at peace with that. She struggled financially since the settlement, having to adjust to living within her actual means for the first time in over a decade. She's taken a full-time job at a department store and moved to a smaller apartment, which is probably how she should have been living all along. I've heard through family members that Carmen is bitter about the settlement, still maintaining that she was just trying to secure Tyler's future and that I was vindictive for taking away David's final wishes. But I've also heard that some of our extended family has distanced themselves from her once they learned the full scope of her deception. The truth about David and Carmen's affair shocked our entire family. Our parents were devastated to learn that one daughter had been lying to them for 13 years while the other daughter was being systematically betrayed. Several family members have admitted they'd suspected something was off about Carmen's financial situation but had never imagined the truth was this elaborate. I've learned some difficult lessons about the difference between forgiveness and enablement. Our family culture emphasized keeping peace, not making waves, and forgiving family members no matter what they did. But forgiveness without accountability just teaches people that they can hurt you without consequences. Carmen expected me to forgive her affair, accept David's betrayal, and quietly disappear so she could enjoy the fruits of their deception. When I refused to be gracious about being robbed, I was suddenly the bad guy who was tearing the family apart. But Carmen and David tore the family apart when they chose lies over honesty and selfishness over integrity. I've also learned that family loyalty works both ways. Carmen demanded that I show her loyalty by accepting her betrayal, but she never showed me loyalty when she was sleeping with my husband and spending my money. She wanted the benefits of being my sister without the responsibilities that come with that relationship. The legal victory was satisfying, but the personal victory was more important. I proved to myself that I was strong enough to fight for what was right, even when it meant going to war with people I'd loved my entire life. I learned that I could survive betrayal, rebuild from devastation, and come out stronger on the other side. People often ask me if I regret pursuing legal action against my own sister, if I think I should have just accepted David's will and moved on for the sake of family harmony. My answer is always the same: family harmony built on lies and injustice isn't worth preserving. Real family harmony requires honesty, mutual respect, and accountability. Carmen and David destroyed our family when they chose deception over truth. I simply refused to pretend their choices were acceptable. I want to address something I see in comments on stories like this: the idea that I should have been grateful for what David left me and not greedy about money that was just going to a child. But this was never about greed or denying Tyler his father's support. This was about refusing to be robbed and lied to. If David and Carmen had been honest from the beginning, we could have worked out a fair arrangement that provided for Tyler without destroying me financially. Instead, they chose a path of deception that required stealing from me to fund their secret life. The real lesson here isn't about money or inheritance law. It's about the importance of standing up for yourself when people you trust try to take advantage of that trust. It's about recognizing that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim to love you. Here's my question for all of you: have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and fighting for what's right? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was lying to you about something fundamental? How do you balance forgiveness with the need for accountability? I really want to hear your stories because I know family betrayal is more common than people admit. Hit that like button if this story made you think about your own family dynamics, and subscribe for more real stories about surviving betrayal and finding justice. Thank you for listening to my story and for all the supportive comments. I hope my experience helps someone else recognize that they deserve better than being lied to and stolen from, even by family members. Your pain matters, your financial security matters, and you have the right to fight for what's yours. Remember, family love should make you stronger, not weaker. If someone claims to love you while systematically betraying you, that's not love, that's manipulation. Trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight for justice when fighting is what the situation requires. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.